So how did MASH come about?
Well, we had worked with a guy named Thad Mumford on a show that we ran. We'd hired him, and we were friends. And he and his writing partner Dan Wilcox were working on MASH. I guess in the ninth season, the third from the ninth.
Yeah,
They were in the ninth. They
they
were
were the actually we came on the eighth season.
No, ninth.
Oh, ninth, yeah,
Yeah.
ninth, 10th, and
Yeah,
11th.
yeah. So they were working, and Thad asked us. He probably had said something to Burt Metcalf already, the showrunner, but he asked us if we'd like to write a MASH episode, and we of course were thrilled with that idea, and we did. We came in and we talked about a story, and I think we had a really good time writing it, and they liked it a lot and asked us to do more.
And sort of tied to that was the fact that years earlier, when Larry Gelbart was running the show, we'd come in to do an episode of MASH as freelancers, and they gave us an episode, right?
I think so, yeah, The Tub.
It was called The Tub, simply about a bathtub that arrives at the MASH unit. And I guess it had been around for a while, and they couldn't get the thing to work, and so they asked us to take a crack at it, which we were happy to do. We worked out a rough story with Larry and Larry Marks, who was the story editor under Larry Gelbart. And brought it back, and for whatever reason, they still couldn't get it to work. You know, we hadn't cracked the tub problem. So
We had written the script, though.
yeah,
This
we
is
wrote
at
the
script level, yeah.
but it just didn't quite work for Larry Gelbart's purposes. So that was that. Years went by, and as Elias just explained, we got the chance to do another one. And we had assumed, well, that's it. We're through with MASH. They'll never use us. And it turned out, Bert said, the mere fact that we got in to see Larry Gelbart years earlier made him think, well, maybe we should give him another chance. So that was the little coda to that story.
And when we were working on MASH, which we freelanced for the 9th season and the 11th season, which was the last season, and we were on staff during the 10th season. During the time we were there, Bert said, we've got this script that you guys wrote many years ago, and we've paid for it. And if you could make it work, it would be great, and it would be another credit for us, and there'd be residuals and all that sort of thing. And we said, terrific. So he gave us the script, and we couldn't figure out how to make it work. It's still
The Tub. You mean The Tub again?
Yeah. Didn't happen.
It was probably based on an actual fact from all those interviews they did with people who had been in MASH units, and probably somebody alluded to something like that or something similar.
Seems like a good MASH idea.
Yeah.
So in the gap between The Tub and when you did come back to freelance, was it an assignment that they gave you, or did you submit or pitch?
Well, when we came in, I think we probably pitched. A lot of ideas, but I think the one we ended up with was
Cementing
one,
relationships.
was one that they had based on research they had done with surgeons who had been in MASH units, who they would call, interview, transcribe the interviews on paper, file them away, and refer to them all the time. This one had to do with
wood floor in the OR.
The wood flooring, the panels in the operating room harboring, what was the specific disease?
I don't know,
I can't
but
remember
certainly
exactly.
that it wasn't sanitary.
Not being surgically sanitary, and having to put in concrete floors. And that was the A story of that first episode. There was a B story having to do with some Italian soldier arriving at the unit who is attracted to Margaret.
What Dave said before is interesting, or I guess what you said, Steve, is that, just so we're talking about the same thing here, that when we would go in and pitch after we were established, which happens with all writers, you don't go in and pitch without a commitment. So you're going to go in and tell them stories, but the understanding is that if they don't like something, if they don't like anything that you bring in, then they'll find something for you to do. So it's pitching, but not to get the job.
Did you ever, did they give you scripts to rewrite, actually?
We
Yeah,
did, yeah.
definitely.
When we were on staff, we wrote a number of scripts, yeah.
So what was your approach to rewriting a script? How would
Well,
how would you take it apart and redo it, or what would you
Well,
do?
you would have a meeting first with
Yeah.
Burt Metcalf and other members of the writing staff. Dennis Koenig was there then.
Oh, yeah,
but
Thad and Dan and Karen.
Thad, Mumford, Dan Wilcox, John Rappaport,
Karen Hall.
and Karen Hall. I think that was it. And there would be a meeting, certainly if not all those writers, maybe some, or maybe just with Burt. And he would go through it and tell us where the problem was. We would have read it over before the meeting, and chances are we probably came in with roughly the same vision of what the problem was. So we're pretty much always on the same page. By then, when we were on staff, it was our second season there, so we knew the show pretty well. And we would just take the notes and apply them to the rewrite. Save what they wanted to save and change what they wanted changed.
By saving and changing, would it also encompass sometimes changing entire scenes, or just how they're
It
written?
could.
It could.
You know, in TV, there's a sort of an unwritten law. At least there used to be, and I don't really know if there still is. And certainly it could be that it does exist on some shows and it doesn't exist on others. But, you know, the writers of TV shows sort of have come to believe, rightly so, that things get rewritten, that's part of the TV business. So people could come in with a script, and it could be rewritten by people on staff, what one might think of as like 80%, an 80% rewrite. But those rewriters would never put in for a writing credit, which they might very well be entitled to in an arbitration. So it's hard to know. I mean, scripts go through, not only do they go through the rewrite of that Dave and I would do on a draft that came in, but then there's a table read, and it goes through another pass after that, and on a show that's done in front of an audience, it's rewritten during the entire production week of the show. So very often at the very end, there's almost nothing left of the original script that came in.
Is rewriting and then I'll get more into the MASH specifics. Is rewriting and punching up the same thing, or are they different?
I think I would call them different. I mean, because
Yeah.
very often you're rewriting not to punch up, but because somebody might hand you a script and say, "This is really too jokey. You know, you got to smooth this out and get the gags out of it. It doesn't feel like our show. It doesn't feel like the kind of things that we do." So, and usually punch up refers to.
Yeah. The term rewriting sort of relates to the structure of the show and something in the story not working right, whereas punching up presumes that the story and everything holds together. It just needs a little light body and fender work with a joke here or there or something like that.
Was there a writer's room for MASH?
Yes.
There was one, which was that Bert's office? I guess it was. That room,
No.
room
We had
29.
we were.
I mean, the room 29 where we all met. That's where Bert.
I guess maybe, yeah.
We did have a room with a couple of couches and a round table, and
We had a deal that Dave and I always really liked to write together. We always felt that our best contribution to any script was what we would do sitting in a room, hammering it out the way we'd always done. When we started out, as we said, there weren't any writers' rooms. So when we went to work on MASH, where they asked us after that first season to come work for them full time, we asked that we not have to go into and work in the writers' room unless it was a time when we had nothing else to do.
plus we had in our deal that 8 episodes were included
Yeah.
in the
Had a lot of
deal.
scripts to
So
write.
we had a lot of scripts to write, and that sort of excused us from having to sit in the room all day.
But there were people who did, and would write their scripts on their own time, and would spend a tremendous amount of time in that room.
But the development of their idea for a show would come out of the writer's room? Is that? The difference?
Well, I think no, I
You
don't
mean
think.
an idea for a given episode, you mean?
Yes.
No, I think the way ideas for episodes happen is that in two ways. Writers come up with the ideas individually and then throw them into the room, and people decide whether or not they want to do it. And I guess on MASH it came out of research, but I don't ever remember a bunch of people sitting around in a room
No.
given the task, because there would be so much dead time.
Yeah.
Given the task of let's come up with some ideas now. That's there's a lot of sitting there staring at walls that goes into coming up with
Typically
ideas.
on a series, if you're doing 24 or 26, I mean, initially, way back, they did 39 shows a season, which seems like a huge amount today. But even with 24 or 22, to get through a season, it's really, by the end, you're down to, you have no stories left and you're just scrambling to get the show shot and written. Burt Metcalf, during his years there, and I don't know if Larry did this during his reign, but we would start in the pre-production period and only do stories. And many of them were from the research. So Burt had a pretty good idea of at least the notions for a lot of stories, and we would sit there and work those out, the whole staff, scene by scene, and write the outlines. And then when we'd finish one outline, we'd avoid the temptation to start writing it and go to the next one. So when they started shooting, when production started, there was like a pile of maybe 10, 12 stories that were pretty much locked in place, because this was a one-camera show, so they could actually shoot them faster than a week. So the pressure was greater. That train coming down the tracks was always gaining speed on us.
Did stories ever come from the research, or was research there to enhance stories?
Stories often came
Yeah.
right out of the research.
They were there to trigger stories, I would put it. You'd see, well, an example of one was an officer who had been there relating on the phone to either I think Gene Reynolds was the one who initially always was sort of making note of the stories, and relating a whole incident about some kind of weird surgical operation they had to perform. And in the course of it, he just happened to throw in a fact unrelated to the operation, but happened to mention it came at a time that he remembered where they just, out of the blue, got a shipment of eggs, something they hadn't been able to eat for months. So as it happened, that became the arrival of eggs became what became an A or B story in an episode that we did, totally unrelated to the surgery.
Yeah, but there were times. I mean, there was
Yeah.
there was one we did about there had been an offer by, I guess, the United States government to any pilot from
Yeah.
North Korea who would land their jet in South Korea,
This was a story we discovered
Yeah.
in the Almanac
Yeah.
in 1953.
and Jeff Tambor ended up being a PR guy in
Yeah.
that episode.
The Army was actually hiring a public relations person to sell the war because they were losing interest in it
So
back
that-
at home. So they offered a reward to any North Korean pilot who would
Fly a plane into this.
who would just give himself up, and we invented a story where a pilot crash lands his plane and they were giving him a portable AM FM radio and a new suit, and as Elias says, Jeffrey Tambor played the part.
What about the process of the military jargon and the medical jargon? How did that find its way into the script? Was that a collaboration with the experts or the consultants and you guys
Yeah.
as writers? Or
Yeah.
how?
Mhm, sure.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
wish I could remember the name of the Army sergeant here in LA who we would call.
God, yeah. What was his name? Yeah.
But he was sort of assigned to us, and we could call him anytime. We would just write the scripts. I had been in the Army, so I knew some jargon. I knew there were colonels and generals and privates and
Well, we,
and we had 201 files, and just from watching the show, you sort of picked up some of the lingo, but you could call him like if you had a crazy idea, like how could a shipment of 12 coffins arrive at the 4077 by mistake? He'd tell you exactly how it could happen.
And the same thing happened with medical. I remember we had the idea, I'm not sure it was our idea, but the idea came up that it would be interesting to, because the winters were so dreadfully cold in Korea, that it would be an interesting idea to do a scene in the OR where the tent sides would be rolled up, and and the cold air would be coming into the tent. And I have a good friend who's a doctor, and I called him, Ron, and so why would they want to do surgery in the OR if it was freezing cold? He had no idea. He's a gastroenterologist, but he called some friends of his, and they came up with the idea. It's called thyroid storm, and that's the kind of place that you might want to do that kind of surgery. So the idea, the medical idea came to fit with another idea, which was to do a scene with, where it was freezing cold in the OR.
And the actual lingo, like during a surgery, we would just write it and, say, hand me the blank, depending upon what the surgery was. And MASH had a doctor assigned to us. Walter Deschel was his name. And we'd call and say, what would a doctor need if he's doing this and that? And we just fill that in and just write it.
That was the easy part.
Yeah, that was it.
We liked that. Yeah.
So I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Let's just say an operating scene.
Sure.
Excuse me. Like in a show like ER, it was pretty straightforward. It was just a lot of jargon, really quickly said, serious, a drama. In a comedy, maybe it's just the illusion, but it seemed like there were times where, like if Hawkeye is involved with the surgery, there was wordplay, a kind of elegance to the way things were said, including the jargon. Is that just my perception?
No. I think
you work to make it all.
Yeah,
I think
you're
that's
very
true.
correct. We always tried to make it realistic, both with the jargon, but given the jargon within the atmosphere of a war with a bunch of surgeons who, while particularly Hawkeye, who was self-consciously funny, all would be speaking this jargon as they really would. So while the actual medical, we didn't twist medical words, but we did interject the attitude. So and all we really were going for was verisimilitude, because we couldn't, probably if you did it strictly by the medical book, there would be a lot of things we didn't even mention.
He never once has said verisimilitude before in my presence, so that's that's quite good.
Yeah.
The reality of the OR was so important that it was kind of a big deal that when in doing MASH they said this was I think a fight that Larry had.
Yeah.
That we're not going to do a laugh track in the OR. So there was a laugh track in the other scenes in MASH, but not when they were in the OR.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that. But attitude, I think you said it because I remember specifically that there was certain, not necessarily a casualness, but an ease with which, like Hawkeye would talk about things that were very technical.
Yeah.
And yes. Okay. So how long did you have when you got an assignment for a script? How long would you have to actually write it and turn it in?
I think a couple of weeks maybe. We tended to do it. That's what we tended to do.
Yeah. I guess it would vary depending upon what the time crunch was at a given time, but you couldn't dilly-dally, but at the same time we never felt really rushed.
Yeah.
But
They'd give us enough time.
a fair amount of time.
Yeah.
There we'd be off in our office just writing it.
In that you were on a show, and it's one of its later seasons, 9 or 10,
9, 10, and 11, the last three.
A show that had been longer than the actual Korean War by at least
Yeah.
double
Yeah.
or more.
Yeah.
How did you come up with fresh stories?
Well, you know, they kept
That's what-
using,
that's what
that
we're
was sort of the job. They continued using the research. They kept going back to the same interviews with doctors because they'd find
Yeah.
little things, you know. Also, there were certain little formats.
Kinds of shows they
Kinds
like
of
to do.
shows they did. I'll give you an example. Early on, they hit upon Hawkeye writing a letter to his father in which he would relate incidents that transpired only recently at the MASH compound. So, you know, we did one episode where we just sort of stole that concept, and we had Hawkeye writing his will and sort of narrating it to himself, and then we would dissolve into scenes where he was elaborating on what he was going to, what he was going to give to the various members of the MASH unit, of what he was leaving them in his will. And, you know, to Colonel Potter, I'm leaving whatever it was, and you'd see
The reason.
You'd see
It's
the
a-
reason. You know, it was provoke. It was. We would go to a scene which captured what he was
In
writing
flashback.
in a flashback.
You know, one of the stories. I mean,
And by the way, just as I recall, he was called up to the front lines when he was doing it, and the bombing
right.
was going
That's right.
on, and you know
he was worried about his life.
Yeah, he was
actually
right at the
worried.
front. Dirt was.
Yeah.
He was in a trench. Dirt was going down his shirt, and he was in danger. So that's what motivated him writing the will.
But you know, when you ask that, Steve, it's an interesting question, and it sort of goes back to the idea of that I was talking about earlier about how the nagging thing for writers all the time is where do the stories come from, and one story that I like to tell about MASH that sort of illustrates how things become transposed is that very quickly there was a story that Dave and I had heard a very long time ago, having nothing to do with MASH or the military, about a well-known star who went into for an ophthalmological exam, and along with him was one of his representatives, his manager or agent or something. And the ophthalmologist finished the examination of the star, and he said to the associate of the star, he said, "Since you're here, do you want to step up in the chair and I'll do an exam on your eyes?" And the guy said, "Fine." And he got into the chair, and the ophthalmologist looked into his eye and saw that the guy had cancer of his eye, and the eye had to be removed. And so that is the kind of story that I think as human beings and as writers stick with you. That story never leaves. It's always there. It's always easy to grab it. And we were working on a MASH episode, and a guy comes into the MASH unit with serious wounds with his buddy. And the guy coming in needs surgery very badly. And they have to give him a transfusion. And the buddy says, you know, I'd really, this is my closest friend, and I'd really appreciate it if I could be the one to give the blood for this. And they say, well, you know, we don't know. We have to check and see if you have a match. So they look at his blood, and they find out that he has leukemia. So the story of that guy with that one problem becomes a MASH episode in a way that you never could have predicted if you weren't stuck at that one place in that story at that time, and that solution presented.
It was one of the funnier episodes.
It was.
Yeah. I can tell you one that we never could get to work. We always thought was a funny idea, but it just didn't lend itself. Nobody could figure out where to go with it. But we knew that during the Korean War, Joseph Stalin died in like 1953. And and we always incorporated news events back home, including even Little Abner's The Schmo and hula hoops and whatever was popular. Studebakers that had the front end on the back end, looked like it was going forward when it was backing up. So we tried to incorporate that in a story where Hawkeye hears that Stalin has died and wants to contact Army headquarters so he can go to the funeral. You know, we saw it as a way where Hawkeye could get, you know, his sarcastic message across about the insanity of the war while attending Joseph Stalin's funeral in Moscow, but
Didn't work.
we could never get the thing to
And
fly.
and on and very similarly, we ended up. I don't know who wrote it, but there was that whole "Moon is Blue" episode where somebody had discovered that the moon
Oh,
is
yeah.
blue was a big cause celeb.
Yeah.
At that time, and it seemed like it presented itself. It was like handing you a MASH episode, because these are the kind of people who would then, when they read about it, have to get a copy of it.
The Moon of Blue was a movie that came out in '53. Everybody thought was just so
Bad taste. It was,
in bad taste. Yeah, because
it
they
was banned and
because they used the word pregnancy.
Yeah, I
or
think that's
something,
right,
or,
yeah.
or virgin or something like that.
maybe
And-
both.
Yeah, or maybe both. Yeah.
Scandalous.
Well, but that
It's scandalous. Yeah.
But that episode did work, and it was a funny episode. Oh, I guess what it was. The movie arrives. They would run movies in the tent, and
Oh,
the
that's
movie,
right.
They're trying to get a hold of a copy of the movie. That's what the story was, and I guess I don't know. They could never get a hold of it. They got every other dumb Western or movie they didn't want to see, and so they finally did get The Moon is Blue, and they can't even finish it. It's so boring. It was, their expectations were never met.
Okay, the finale. I know the public, there was great anticipation for the finale,
Yeah.
of MASH, especially MASH. How about for you two as writers? What was the anticipation like? And also, what was your part of writing the finale?
Well, are you familiar with how it was written? It was 2.5 hours, right?
Two, I think, but maybe two and a half.
Yeah,
I think
two
it
or
was
2.5 hours. And the way we all sat around with Alan Alda and worked on the story together. And that was over a period of days.
This was determined all in advance that
Yeah.
this is the way it would go.
Even in advance of finishing the other episodes. And so we sat around for, this might have gone on for maybe a couple of weeks even,
Yeah, probably.
meeting off and on.
Probably
And, I remember one meeting was at, a restaurant. And so the story was finally locked down. And then Alan Alda, and then the show was divided up into half hours among all the writers. And Alan would work with all of the writers. He's the first
He was the
half.
common-
He was the common denominator. The first half hour was assigned to Elias and I, and John Rappaport and Thad, and I don't exactly remember who wrote what portions. And at the time, this was in the third season, which we were now back writing freelance episodes because we were then working on an overall deal at Warner Brothers. So we wrote our half hour with Alan. He came over to our office at Warner Brothers, and his way of writing was just talking into a tape recorder,
Yeah.
which he ran, which he turned on and
Something
off.
We had never done.
Yeah, so we always knew if the machine wasn't rolling, it wasn't recording what we were saying. So anyway, he did that with all the writers, and that was as far as the mechanics of how the thing was written. That was how we did it. My main memory that always lasts is the night that it ran. We all gathered at 20th Century Fox and watched it in a screening room there.
Watch not the broadcast, but they had a film of it.
yeah.
We watched the film.
But it was that same night.
Yeah.
The same night that it was there. We probably were seeing it roughly around this.
A little earlier.
A little earlier than the stations on the West Coast. And so we saw the final MASH, and then we all drove to a little dinner, a little party where we took over a Moroccan restaurant that was a favorite of Alan's on Westwood Boulevard. And driving there with my wife, we just noticed there were no cars on the road. It got a 77% share, unheard of for decades. I think it was finally beaten by a Super Bowl game.
Yeah.
Decades later. And there just was no cars on the road. It was very strange. And then
It was the anticipation. I mean, the anticipation was this is going to be really a big deal. I don't think any of us had ever worked on a show that we knew was going to get a big audience, and for sure, I mean, it was going to get a gigantic audience. So there was a kind of a pressure on, for that reason on that particular episode.
What's the legacy of MASH?
Well, we get a residual check about
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, every few weeks. They get smaller and smaller, though.
It's one of the good things.
Yeah.
I think that it was, what everybody knows, I guess, is that it was the anti-war show. It was a Korean war show about the Vietnam War, and I think one of the legacies of MASH that we haven't talked about that people probably in the entertainment business a lot of them think about is that Larry Gelbart, about whom we haven't talked very much, was an absolutely brilliant writer. He was just the experience of going in to meet with him on that episode that they never shot, the tub, was a great experience. He was a lot like Paddy Chayefsky, and another guy we worked with at one time, Danny Arnold, was that same kind of guy. These were these bigger than life, incredibly smart, driven, creative people. And Larry had worked on, when he was a kid, he was writing for comics and had been in New York writing on
Caesar's Hour.
shows. Not Caesar's Hour? Not
No,
show
Caesar's
shows, just
Hour.
Caesar's Hour. And so his legacy was that there was a way to do this kind of satire that was real and outrageously funny and said something about things that he cared about. I mean, we always talk about, Dave, you know more about this one than I, but the Iron Guts Kelly story, which was so quintessentially, yeah.
Iron Guts Kelly was sort of a classic MASH episode that I believe Larry wrote with somebody else, and I just can't remember who at the moment, but having to do with a big three-star general who visits the MASH unit, has a brief fling with Margaret, and
Then called Hot Lips.
Dies, and
In the process.
in the process, and much of the episode has to do with having to concoct a story where he's killed in action. So,
right?
yeah. And it's just, as we were talking earlier, we really, we were like students of Larry's writing. We studied those earlier shows, we read those scripts, we looked at the episodes. The dialogue that you alluded to just earlier in the operating room being sort of clipped and shorthanded, we just mimicked Larry. We just copied him, and he was just a great teacher. And as Elias said, Danny Arnold and all those guys we worked with, Alan Burns and Jim Brooks.
Yeah. I don't know if I know Larry was interviewed. I don't know if he talked about this, but when they started doing MASH, and this is an interesting story about television, I think, that when they started doing MASH in its very early days, which was based on the movie, which was based on a book, it was a little bit old-fashioned. It was kind of an old-fashioned kind of show. I remember we saw some sort of locked, whatever they call them, locked door English mystery kind of episode they did with Hawkeye pretending to be that kind of a Sherlock Holmes kind of character, and the shows weren't particularly good, and Larry, I guess, realizing that they had to do something different, had this idea. The idea was, if I remember it correctly, that at the MASH unit, an old friend of Hawkeye's, who I guess was a reporter or something like that, comes through the MASH unit, and they have some drinks, and talk about the old times, and then the guy goes up to the front and is wounded and comes back to the MASH unit, and they have to operate on him, I guess Hawkeye, and they have to operate on this guy, and he dies. And they sent that idea over to CBS, and maybe the script, but probably the idea, and CBS said, well, you can't do that. You know, that's not a comedy. It's not what MASH is supposed to be about. And Larry and Gene Reynolds said, no, that's the show we want to do. We think that is the kind of thing that can make a difference in this show. And they finally let them do it, and it was the difference. Burt Metcalf tells that story all the time. That was the show that totally changed the direction of the show, and I think that's the legacy of the show, is that you could do these, you know, we were talking earlier about, you know, where Dave made the comment about that was one of the funnier episodes. We wrote, and all the writers wrote episodes all the time that had really funny stuff in them and had really tragic stuff in them. And I think I think television shows today, some of the better comedies on TV today, have those same qualities. They're not just about the laughs, but they can be about some serious stuff in the laughs. And I think that was the legacy of MASH.
As a matter of fact, the higher the stakes in the drama, the funnier the comedy would be.
Yeah.
Larry had said from the very beginning he didn't want to do McHale's Navy. That was the way he always put it.
Yeah.
Back in those days, we would have been thrilled to do a McHale's Navy.
Yes. Yes.
This question isn't specifically about MASH, but
Yeah.
it can include MASH. What do you do when you have writer's block?
We're not allowed to.
You just, yeah.
We couldn't do it.
You can have it every day, you know. There's always moments when you can't figure a problem out, but ultimately, there's just no time to, you know, you're always so rushed to getting the things done.
It's easier to
and
be a
over
team.
time, you know, after been doing it for years, you know how to sort of come at the problem maybe a different way, or, you know, maybe put a stopgap solution to a problem and come back to it later. But usually you just keep going.
You know, there are the deadlines. There is the deadline problem that they want the script, and it happens in the movie business. You know, we've done that, and it happens in the TV business. And somehow, when you're, I think, an important part of the idea of being a professional writer is that you don't let the idea that you just can't think of a thing to do stop you from sitting there and trying. I mean, novelists are always right. I mean, I think Philip Roth has written about it, you know, that you go into your office and sometimes you spend a day where nothing happens, but you still go into your office every day and try to write.
It's also hard to tell the difference between an unsolvable problem and writer's block.
Yeah, that's right. That's
You
right.
don't exactly know.
Yeah, and
Which
I
is
think
which.
having a partner helps too. In you know, a lot of people write alone and manage to get done every day. And also, I mean, that is true. But
And
but
if we
having a
both
partner
can't
is
come
easier.
up with something, then we're convinced that it's unsolvable, and we can just relax and
Move on.
go get something to eat.
Have either of you had anyone you've considered mentors?
Yeah, I think.
Well, I think all those
people
writers
we talked about.
we
Yeah.
mentioned, you know, they all in their own way, including, you know, Patty Chayefsky and Danny Arnold and Larry Gelbart,
Yeah.
certainly. Although, you know, back when we were talking about being ushers, we were seeing Larry Gelbart there. He was on the Danny Kaye show.
And Carl
Carl
yeah,
Reiner.
Carl's approach to there's like, I think one of the hard or one of the fun things is sort of you pick up some stuff from some people. I mean, we even mentioned earlier, and it's true that when we went to work on the Pat Boone show and the Steve Allen show and Bernie Kukoff and Jeff Harrison, all we were writing there were just sketches. I mean, they never were meant to be about anything serious, I don't think, unless we subtly thought we were getting a dig at something. And those guys taught us stuff, you know, about how to look at the material and how to find things that just weren't jokes about it. And so I think each one of those places along the way, you pick stuff up that you don't only integrate it, you do integrate it, but you actually also very often specifically remember that that's the kind of thing that, you know, that Patty would do, and we try to do more of that. So those are our mentors.
Although we might not have realized it
Yeah.
at the given moment. It'd go even back to when I was saying, listening to Jack Benny driving around in the back seat of my parents' car on Sundays as a kid, hearing his, because later we wrote for Jack Benny on a summer show we did in London, and also for monologue material for a Vegas engagement. And it was just hearing his voice from all those years as a kid, just picking up those rhythms.
I just wondered a little bit about this show you created called One Big Family. What was the experience like compared to being writers that you created a show?
Yeah, that was.
They already had the idea.
Yeah, they gave us the premise, and I guess
They meaning Whit Thomas Harris,
Paul
Whit
Witt,
and
Tony Thomas, and they had this idea for a family, a young family, with Danny Thomas as an uncle.
who was Tony Thomas's father.
Who was Tony? Yeah, and Uncle Jake was his name, who would visit and appear on about, I don't know, 8 episodes, say. And so yeah, we can't really say that we came up with this thing because we didn't. I guess that's why we can't say it. But we just sort of hammered it into shape, helped them hammer it into shape.
We wrote the story, we wrote the script.
Story, yeah, wrote the pilot, and then we're the producers of the series under Paul and Tony. And I guess, we were a little leery writing for Danny Thomas because, he was I guess we had heard from various writers that he could be difficult. But he was just a dream. We love doing shows where he was on them. Very easy for us to work with, and we love writing for him. Again, this was a voice.
We were fans.
We were fans. Yeah, we had seen those earlier Make Room for Daddies and seen him in old movies and monologues he was a great monologist, and in fact that was how he started. So it was fun just writing for him.
My parents used to go to see him in clubs in Chicago, when he was
5400 Club.
Was that
right?
Yeah. I mean, it was like, and would come back talking about it. He was, but but we wrote other pilots that didn't, that we got paid to write, but they didn't necessarily sell. And it's always an interesting thing to do because you're trying to figure out a situation that works with characters and that work in a way that you might be able to continue, doing that.
Yeah, we
year
wrote
after
tons of shows that didn't work. You very nicely have brought up
didn't ask us about those.
Only the nice projects, but there
Yeah.
a lot of
Many.
shows that just for any number of reasons didn't work.
You were both writers and producers on Frasier. What was the producer part of your job?
The producer part of our job essentially didn't exist. That was our credit. Often,
That's what's happened in the business.
a lot of shows, people are given the title of producer, and we like everyone else are happy to take that title. But you always know you're really there to be a writer. The people who ran the show were David Angel, David Lee, and Peter Casey, and they. It was their show. They created it. They knew it backwards and forwards, and I think there were even other people under them like us who also had producer titles. But we all knew we were writers, and we had earlier written a Cheers episode that was focused heavily on the character of Frasier. He and his wife Lilith. Had their son who was having a bris, and that was the substance of the Cheers episode. So we knew the character well. It was that all the characters on that show were easy to capture and fun to write.
How was the writers' room run on that show?
There was a writer's room.
Yes, there certainly was.
Yeah, there was a writer's room. Although we all had our offices too. Ours was on the Paramount lot right next door to the daycare center, I remember.
There are different times. I mean, writers' rooms have different functions at different times. When you've just been to a run-through of an episode, and you've seen what works and doesn't work. Then you come back from that run through, and usually the showrunner, the person in charge, or the people in charge will go through just sort of page by page, and say, here's what we don't think is working here, and we don't, and then writers pitch. Sometimes we've been on shows where the show is in such trouble that whole scenes are thrown out and sometimes reconceived and given to various writers to go off to their office like at 9 o'clock at night, and to have a script ready that's going to be read the next morning, and to totally write a new scene. So I think that show was just a typical sitcom writer's room. That sometimes it's hammering. It's sometimes everybody's getting together to hammer a story into shape. Sometimes it's a script that's going to the table the next week, and everybody has to sit down and really get it as sharp as you can to be ready for the actors to read it.
We were mentioning earlier how one job will get us another job, and as I think about it, because we had written for Frasier, that series
funny.
got us into movie rewrites when the movie Bad Boys with Will Smith and
Martin
Lawrence. The Bad Boys 1 was coming out. They had shot the movie, and they had holes in logic in the plot, and they hired us and another writer on another show named Danny Zucker just to do repair work on the movie. And because they liked a Frasier script we had written called The Club, which got us nominated for the Writers Guild Award.
Well, here's another.
That got us the job with the producers of
Toys?
Bad Boy.
Martin. Yes, I know. Jerry Bruckheimer.
Jerry Bruckheimer
and Simpson
and Don
Bruckheimer.
Simpson. And then also, so that got us launched us into movie rewrites, which we did for about 5 or 6 years, which we're grateful to get. And
Toy Story.
And because Bad Boys was such a huge hit, on Toy Story 2, Kelsey Grammer was also
one of the voices.
One of the voices. He was the prospector, which was a chief character in Toy Story 2. So because we had written for Frasier, a totally different character, they figured, well, we
know Kelsey.
We know Kelsey. So they hired us to do rewriting on Toy Story 2. Which
really
turned out to
no
be
sense.
a great job. It lasted about 1.5 years, and we'd have to fly up to Pixar and up in the Bay Area, and we really enjoyed that.
What advice would you give to an aspiring writer, television writer?
Well, first of all, there's a
To aspire a lot.
yes. There's one difference between what happens now and what used to happen, and I don't quite understand it, but it is that when Dave and I were starting out, and a lot of writers work this way. I mean, it didn't do us a lot of good, but when they want to get into the situation comedy business, they used to write a spec script for an existing show, just as we discussed before, and then the producers of that show would never give you a job, but somebody else on another show might say, "Well, they're pretty good. Look at the great job they did on the Seinfeld episode or whatever." And so that was always the advice. The advice was find the episodes that people are writing specs of. I mean, the series that people are writing spec episodes of, and do a really good job of writing one of those. Now, what they want is aspiring writers to write spec pilot scripts, a brand new idea that's never been done before. And somehow, I think they're hoping at some level that something will be so good that in addition to being a good writing sample, it will actually sell and become a series. But what Dave said is absolutely true. Aspire a lot. You just have to write all the time.
And in addition to writing a pilot, it's a practical solution too, because today's shows are on and off so fast that if you sit down and write one about a series you like, 3 months later it could be gone and nobody saw it, nobody remembered it, so they don't know if you've captured the characters. at all. And
But, you
that's
know-
really what they're looking for, how well you can capture the characters.
I think aspire a lot is in fact the answer. It's all about
Yeah.
writing all the time. Because if you don't write all the time, in some way or other, either something that's on the air or something new, if you're not constantly working hard to write, then when that inevitable break comes, like Turteltaub and Ornstein, who never read a sitcom that we'd written, but saying, you guys should write one of these, because we'd been working hard and we'd been trying to do the best we could at being good writers. When the time came, we had the opportunity to do something they might like. And if people don't do that, then I don't think there's a chance. And I also think that the internet provides a lot of opportunities for people now to get involved with projects that are that may not have huge audiences and people don't know that much about, but are a chance to show what you can do as a writer.
And the greatest weapon I think you can have on your side is wanting to do it badly.
Yeah, that's right.
Really having a passion for it, because that will just keep you heading into through all the obstacles and all the setbacks.
Yeah, yeah.
Elias, what's your favorite David story in a minute or less?
Oh my gosh, that's a terrible question to ask. Here's my. It's a story about David, but it's more about me, and it's not anything he did specifically, but it's a story I've always told, and it's true. And I'm glad you mentioned it. Going back to when we were ushers at CBS, and Dave was taking tours, and he always had, at each stop along the way, he'd have his jokes that he would do, and just seemed so comfortable and at home.
I think I know where this is headed.
No. Oh. Seemed so comfortable and at home with the experience, and in the ushers, there was an ushers lounge, where some people we should mention at some point actually hung out, who became pretty successful. Dave was always really comfortable with that, and people think I'm kidding when I tell this story. I actually thought, and I'm very conscious of it, Dave Pollock is this really, really, really funny guy, and I liked him, and I thought, if I can just team up, if I can just become part, of Dave Pollock's writing life, then I'm going to be a big success.
Like some gum stuck to my shoe.
Yeah. I really consciously thought that, and I've been forever grateful that it worked out that way, and I still feel the same way.
So, David, you're...
And one of the people, by the way, in that usher's room, it was David Geffen, who was a fellow.
What happened to
usher.
him?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, David, what's your minute or less story about Elias?
I think my favorite story is Elias's story that he just told about me. Well, this isn't a pretty funny story, but I always thought we worked well as a team, because Elias had a great ability to, we would go in, particularly on sitcoms, to get notes, and they can be sometimes really elaborate. Move this from this scene and give this line to that guy, and cut out any references to this, and we'd both be scribbling down notes, hoping to get it down. Sometimes you could have a little tape recorder going, but pretty much it was on the fly. You couldn't ask people to repeat a lot of stuff, because they're trying to concentrate and move ahead, and you were just whatever you could get down, and hope to heck between the two of us that we got it. And so many times we then go back to our office to try to figure this thing out. And I'd look at my notes and I'd say, in the third scene, we have to do Krillbug. K-R, what was I writing? I could never organize. I was never good in school, in college, in taking notes. And Elias, he said, "Don't worry about it. I have it all figured out." We'd come walking out of the meeting, and I'd be saying, "Wait, Elias, what do we do here?" Don't worry, I got it all. He'd have it all figured out. He could read his notes right there. He had a head start, and or he didn't have to take the notes. He just saw it all. He was had a great sense of concentration. Well, I was worried about what was going to be funny, maybe, But he just had a overall vision of the whole concept and exactly what he was like, working with a roadmap.
Those days are over.
So, David, how would you like to be remembered?
Gee, I don't ever give any thought to that, just a guy who did what he wanted to do. I don't have any illusions about writers being particularly remembered, really, other than by their families, I don't think we view ourselves as celebrities, really. This could be the height of it.
It is, yeah.
We did very little performing, on the second season of Steve Allen, I was sort of the announcer. Occasionally, on the Don Knotts show, we were pressed into being like, having little lines in an occasional scene. But, we were just, guys in a room, unseen by the public, really.
But you had an effect on the public.
Well, I get you. Yeah, we for the moment those shows were on, we did. But people don't look at these shows and think about, geez, I wonder who wrote that. It's just. I think if you have those kind of expectations, you're going to be headed for disappointment.
Elias?
Yeah, I think I agree just about 100% with Dave. One thing we didn't talk about here, and I'll try to keep this short, which is important, and I think it's important to every team. We spent an inordinate amount of time trying not to write. I mean, it was just, we went to great lengths to figure out ways to talk about other things and to not, I first of all, I couldn't write till I turned the typewriter around and heard that noise. It was a Pavlovian
It's
thing.
called sharpening pencils.
Yeah,
All
sharpening
writers,
pencils.
you
We all do it. And so consequently, we got to know each other really well. We would talk about our families. We'd talk about, our trips. We talked about our mental health and our therapists and, all sorts of stuff that was so much a part of our lives. And I think that in doing that, we both came to some of the same conclusions about what the important things are in life, as Dave's just said. I don't think we ever once talked about, boy, they're going to, we never had that thing, oh, man, they're going to love us and, and we're going to be big shots or something like that. It would never, those kind of conversations ever happen. We'd talk about our families. I'd like my legacy, I suppose, to be, as far as my work goes, that I was a hard-working journeyman writer who knew something about writing, and mostly thought of as the kind of person I am as a father and husband and friend, which I hope I did better than as a writer. Yeah.
Okay. Elias Davis and David Pollock, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Enjoyed it.